Hello everyone, it's Becky here from Ivy's Corner, and I am going to be drawing a tangle for you today called Gneiss, which is a Zentangle HQ pattern, and it is spelt not necessarily in the way that you would think. It is spelt with a G, a silent G. So G-N-E-I-S-S, Gneiss. This is a really fun pattern, and it is one that is kind of quite dramatic and would look really nice as kind of the central element of a tile. I think it would be a lovely kind of drama tangle in the centre, you know. So what I've got here is I've got my 2-inch square self-cut tile from Fabriano Tiepolo paper. I have a Micron PN, I have a Zentangle pencil and a tortillon. And I'm going to start off this pattern by drawing an orb. So I'm going to start off by drawing a nice big orb. Now, this pattern has a couple of different ways of approaching it, and I'm kind of going to show you the standard Zentangle HQ step out version of this, initially at least. So here is my lovely big orb, and I'm now going to create some crosses across the centre. So just going to draw some lines across the diameter of this circle, and actually there's nothing to say that you have to keep these the intersecting points in the center. If you wanted to do all your points intersecting in the center, then you can, but I actually might just make mine slightly off center, because why not? So I'm now going to create all of my lines crossing my circle with this point as the central one, and I'm going to just do maybe one more here. So I've divided my circle up into a number of different areas there, and actually you can keep going and make your areas smaller if you want to. There's kind of not really any rules with this. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a little point a little bit further down inside each of these kind of segments of my circle here. So in the central kind of area of that, I'm going to just do a little dot all the way around in each of my segments. And it's just going to kind of be a gauge for where I want to do my next step of the pattern. And that is going to be to join together the outside point where these diameter lines intersect with the outside to my dot that I've placed. So I'm going to just draw a line and create a little V shape within each of these little segments. So just taking my time and connecting the dot in the centre with these outside points of the circle. I'm just enjoying drawing these lines to create this really cool shape which is starting to emerge. And once I've done all of those, obviously it might take you a little longer if some of your spaces are a bit bigger, but once I've done those, I'm going to then join where my dot was. I'm going to join that point down back to the centre here. So I'm just going to have these almost sort of triangular shapes that have been created now. And I'm going to do that on every single one. Obviously some of the shapes you're now creating are going to be smaller than others, well, depending on how big your shape is overall. Now there's a couple of things that you can do with this. You could just shade this area, one of the things I like to do is just to add some ink. So if you wanted to, rather than going in with ink further, you could just add alternating spaces of graphite, but I'm going to go in with the black because I think it looks it makes a really nice kind of dramatic tangle if you do so. So placing your ink into these spaces, and I've chosen, if you imagine each of these sections here is like this diamond section is now divided into two halves. I've chosen the right hand half of each, so I'm going to do the same sort of sided space as I turn my tile, and I'm going to ink in the right hand space within each of these diamond shapes. It's nice to spend a little bit of time adding ink to our tiles. I think it gives a nice sense of drama, but it's also a nice kind of way of losing yourself in the process and just focusing on watching the ink travel from your pen onto the paper. And I think that's one of the reasons that I think, you know, things like adult colouring have become so popular. And so I suppose this is similar in that way, but it's obviously Zentangle has a little bit more to it than just adding colour, because we're creating pattern as well. So I'm just always making sure that I'm using the right hand space within these diamond shapes. Of course, if you did do the wrong one, it's, you know, it's never a mistake. You would just need to have a little think about how you adapt your next steps onwards to incorporate that new addition. But as we say in Zentangle, there are no mistakes, only opportunities. So perhaps if you ended up colouring what you might perceive to be the wrong area, it would actually lead to something else that looks really cool. You know, you could maybe play with adding in some white jelly roll to kind of change that effect, or, you know, there's all sorts of things that you could do. So I've got 2 more spaces to fill here, and just almost completed with this inking in on this particular tangle. And there's another step to this tangle, and initially, so you could easily draw this sort of star shape without having this outer circle initially if you wanted to. That would be an easy thing to do. You would just go ahead and draw your lines that were crossing over across your tile or whatever space that you have available. Because we've started here with this outer circle, what we're going to do is just aura these kind of border circle lines, if you will, and just nice and fine follow round this line. And actually, if you want to play around with the texture of the line, so maybe just leave a couple of little gaps like shine breaks almost, then you can do so. And just auraing this outside line to create this fun texture around the outside of your nice star. So just maybe just leaving a couple of little breaks in the line here and there. It's going to give it a little bit more texture, but I'm just keeping my auras really fine. And you'll see, because I'm right-handed, I'm auraing the lines on the right-hand side. So if I were left-handed and auraing it on the right, I'd be crossing my hand over where I would need to see the line to follow it. So doing it this way just means that you are not blocking your own view of the line that you're trying to aura. And you can see some of my aura lines are a little bit wonky, but that's okay, I'm not worried about that. And I'm just taking my time and keeping my hand relaxed and drawing these lovely repetitive aura lines. And the fun thing about doing this is that you will find that once you have completed a lot of your aura lines, this outer border that we initially drew sort of starts to get lost and disappear. It was very kind of bold before, and actually by just doing these repetitive auras within these spaces, it's kind of reducing the impact of that bold borderline that we began with, I think. And especially so if once we've completed this final little section here, if I now come around an aura around the outside with the same kind of width of aura, I'm going against my own advice there and auraing the wrong side of the line, and then just continuing this aura around the outside of our initial borderline, then that borderline is going to sort of get a little bit more lost and become less kind of important, I suppose. And it was more like a guideline initially. You can see my auras are very wonky, but again, I'm not worried about that. You can just take your time creating your lines and turning your tile. Following those lines nice and slow. And so you can kind of see how it just becomes part of that borderline just becomes part of the pattern that you kind of almost can't really see. So there is the basic kind of Gneiss, and I'm going to pick up my pencil and start shading. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do this. I would suggest either choosing one sort of with these spaces that are left with the white area. I'd suggest either doing one side or the other and then blending in. So just placing a little bit of graphite along one side, either the top or the bottom of that space. I am placing it on the top here, like so, and then I'm just going to blend it down into the remaining space. But I do want to retain some highlights here, because if I lose my white space, then I'm going to lose any kind of sense of the highlights and the contrast between the two, the darkest of the blacks and the lightest of the whites. So just placing the graphite down and then smoothing it slightly just to reduce the harsh line of the graphite. Just adding a little bit of pressure onto that tortillon to soften. And there you have it. I've shaded that. Obviously, of course, if you wanted to, you could go ahead and just add some more along the edges of your Gneiss, which I think I might do, just to lift it away from that textured sort of background. And by doing so, it just increases the kind of contrast and depth. I always think if you have a textured kind of area, it's nice to be quite bold on top of it with your shading. And that's just going to really lift that pattern away from this background area. I think the more lines you add to your Gneiss, then the smaller your spaces are, the more you're just going to need to be a bit more aware of the highlights that you're retaining within the pattern. But there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that little run through of this pattern. It's a really fun one. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. You can check out my website www.ivies-corner.com for lots more information, blogs and lessons. I've got some free lessons as well, so don't forget to check those out, and I'll see you next time.